Welcome. This is Astrology Insight Now, a weekly forecast program with astrology and other ways to help you make the most of your week and to heighten confidence for daily life. It's run by Pamela Cuccinell, that's me, the astrologer, and I invite you to find out more about my work at insightoasis.com. I look forward to your joining us every week. Please share with your friends, and here we go. This recording precedes the one about the week of going into July 7th, when Uranus moves into the sign of Gemini. It's valuable, I think, to read my article on Spot On Astrology on Substack about Uranus and Gemini. I will be talking about it quite a bit. But this particular week, we are in the final movements of Uranus in the sign of Taurus. So imagine that the planet that has to do with change and revolution is in the last stages of the sign that's about fixed Earth, arguably the most stolid, steady sign in the zodiacal wheel. And it has been the agent of a great deal of change, because the planet Uranus, which is about change and revolution and freedom, has been moving through this sign that is, I don't want to change. I like the way we've been doing things. And so there is a lot of upset that has been occurring, and not necessarily chaos for its own sake, although it certainly feels like that at times. But this particular week in the United States leads into July 4th, Independence Day, and I am not alone on this. A lot of astrologers have been writing about all the change that is happening in the United States, symbolized by the Pluto return. And now we are in the processing of the changes that must take place, the transformations that must take place in this very large, wealthy, conflicted nation. So June 30th, the moon is in the sign of Virgo. Virgo is the sign of the helper. It wants to do service. It wants to do the work that it's at hand. And again, because of how it's aspected over the next day or so, there's a lot of, well, let's try this, or let's do it this way. Virgo is a mutable sign, so it has a lot of adaptability. The willingness to shift directions if it can see, oh, this is not quite working today, so let's do this instead. It doesn't get stuck a lot. The sign of Virgo at times can seem very still, quiet to people who are not familiar with the energy, because what's happening is Virgo wants to focus on whatever the task at hand may be. And so instead of making a lot of noise or attention to what's going on, there is this laser vision. And at times it can be a little stuck, but in general, if the overall, how do I make this thing work in the way I want it to, is the main focus, then that's what's going to transpire. So I see Monday, the 30th, and the times I give are Eastern time zone. So some of us may need to modify what I'm saying, depending on where you are in the world. But pretty much I see it as being an overall productive day, especially for those of us who are able to adapt, sort of change directions, modify, keep with the idea of what it is we want to accomplish over time, with whatever's going on. We're in the waxy moon cycle, so this is a perfect opportunity to kind of make the week roll out as you would like, especially for people who may be taking a long weekend or just sort of doing quiet stuff over that period of time because they don't want to be out and about, which is certainly a consideration for a lot of people with the volatility that is happening in the world and specifically the United States at this point in time. On Tuesday, July 1st, my calendar tells me it's Canada Day, so celebration to Canadians. The moon goes void of course at 4:47 p.m. And that kind of leads us to the most dynamic point of acting on, especially anything spontaneous or that comes in with an idea or a fresh way of seeing things. This can be a time when we really kind of move to let's go that way for the things I want to make happen. The thing that I'm thinking about with the metaphor for these couple of days is think about a seed and how a seed may move through, yes, we can plant the seed, but also we might end up with a seed having appeared in our garden because some bird dropped it or it flew in by the wind. So that's a very Moon in Virgo sort of thing where something gets planted that does start to take root that wasn't necessarily part of the plan, but the idea is to work with what we have as it's presented to us. And that's not just the Virgo piece, that's Virgo working with the planet Uranus, which now is also in an earth sign for a brief amount of days. So the moon enters the sign of Libra at 5:16 p.m. on Tuesday the 1st. And that void of course period basically is a time when usually we organize, put things in order, we don't start something new, we work on something already in motion, or we chill. So once the moon is in the sign of Libra, this is heading towards the quarter moon, and it invites in looking at situations that are working and not working. One of the things that's occurring is that moon in Libra is early on this evening being affected by what is still a conjunction in the sky of Saturn and Neptune from our perspective. If one were able to telescope out, Saturn is in a position, and then way back behind it is Neptune in a line from Earth's perspective. And that combination of Saturn, the manifester, what concretized, brings things down to Earth, limits, in combination with Neptune, the numinous, the infinite, the undefined, the void, is an interesting combination to say the least. So on this evening, we might be, some of us especially, might be in dialogue or consideration with how do I make this idea happen? Because one of the wonders about a Saturn-Neptune conjunction is it allows us to bring down to earth something that may feel a bit unfathomable. And that can look like a lot of things. One of the things I think is especially possible at this point in time when it seems as though everything is so big and almost inconceivable how we can harness or bring a sense of combination, collaboration with so many disparate pieces in the world, so many oppositions, so many polarities. So how can that possibly happen? And part of it on a night like tonight is about dialogue, like getting involved with, well, you see it this way, I see it this way. Is there a way that there's some sort of truth or thing that we can create with our different concepts that looks like something we can't even imagine? And I think part of what happens on an evening like the first is that some of the dialogues seem just impossible, like the walls are up, there's no give. And then others bring in this perspective that we can maybe feel, sense, taste, smell, but we've never really visualized or put it on paper before. So it's a terrific night for dreaming, for writing down ideas, for pros and cons, for teasing out possibilities with either yourself or someone or a group of people. It can be incredibly dynamic for that. And as we go into the next day, Wednesday, the 2nd, there can be some back and forth and wow, that's so many directions. How do we pull it in? How do we modify or put it in a way that at least is small bites or step by step? In Mexico, we say poco a poco, little by little. You get somewhere, but you have to begin. So that's a lovely way to work out this quarter moon energy that goes void of course at 3:30 p.m. on Wednesday the 2nd. And then the moon is void of course late afternoon, evening, all the next day, the 3rd, until it enters the sign of Scorpio at 5:33 a.m. on July 4th. So that long period of the void of course moon is, I think, an opportunity for us to, as I said earlier, like get things in order so that when the moon starts to be in geometric pictures with other planets, we are in a place where we feel as though, okay, I don't have to think about that or deal with that. I've got things where they need to be. So with the long void and the moon in the sign of Libra, and this may look different if that moon is passing through a point in your horoscope, especially Libras, someone who feels somewhat triggered or invited through the movement of that moon. But in general, with that long void, of course, we're looking at perhaps conversations, litigation, mitigation, things that we're working on understanding in a process of compromise, agreement, contractual things, how people come together or negotiate something. It's not a time to shake hands and say, yes, let's do it this way, because usually there's not enough skin in the game, emotional content for people to really be invested in what that is when the moon is void, of course. So the ideal is to, if you are in a business situation or a negotiation situation, or you're working on getting something out, project, the ideal is that this isn't when it's launched or delivered, but more that this is the dress rehearsal, but not in front of the critics or people who really matter. It's more, let's see where we might have to change something, shift it, redirect. Is it landing any? And because the emphasis is not on let's connect. The emphasis is more on how do I see where I'm at this point in time. We organize, get files in order, work on things already in motion. We take a time out. We reassess without making any rock solid commitment. And what's interesting about this day, especially the entire day of July 3rd, especially for people who are in the United States, is it's a quiet period, should be a quiet period. People may be making a lot of noise. There may be a lot of bluster. There may be news cycles. There may be a lot that is said, but is it going anywhere? Does it have any teeth? And that's the part that can be reflected on for those of us who can stop back and look at it. Now, some people are going to be right in the trenches because of their work, of things that they're called to do. And I think the important thing to note when the moon is void, of course, if you're feeling as though you're not really getting anywhere, work on what you can work on to kind of make the thing more stable or visual, or what it needs to be in order to then bring it to the point of presentation and real consideration. So July 4th, 2025. As I said, the moon entered the sign of Scorpio in the early hours, and it's in the sign of Scorpio all day, the 5th into the 6th, when it goes void, of course, at 6:04 p.m. So unlike the long void we just came through in an air sign, we're going through a very long travel of the moon in the sign of Scorpio. It's not inordinately long. I mean, it's 2 days and change is the usual sailing of the moon. It's just the difference is in the sign of Scorpio, it has ground to cover, and its last aspect will be in opposition to Uranus, which is in its latest degrees of Taurus before it moves into Gemini next week. So Scorpio and Taurus, for those who know a bit about astrology, are both fixed signs. Scorpio, the water sign, Taurus, the earth sign. And the opposition of the moon to Uranus symbolizes the potential for emotional upsets. Now, that happens exactly more when we get to specifically 6:04 p.m. on Sunday the 6th. But that dance is something we are coming to once the moon enters the sign of Scorpio. We know that that is ahead of us. We're not necessarily feeling it or sensing it on July 4th. However, the other thing that goes on July 4th is that the moon is in square 90 degrees from Earth's perspective to the planet Pluto, because Pluto is at early degrees Aquarius. So it begins its movement. And there's another interesting picture in the sky this day, too. Venus is in the sign of Taurus, and she is conjunct Uranus in Taurus. So this gives a lot of, let's say, relationship juice to the journey of the moon in Scorpio as it moves over the other planets it connects with before it hits the Uranus opposition. And I think one of the biggest messages of this day into the whole weekend is it's super important to be aware of how we're relating to other people in our lives. And so this isn't just your children, your spouse, your friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, teachers, bosses, coworkers, neighbors. This is also anyone you're encountering throughout your day-to-day life over the next couple of days. And I think one thing it drives home is it's not just this period of time. It's also how do we relate to people who are very peripheral, people who are intimate, people who are close, people who we see on a regular basis, people we don't even know, but who we are affected by and who are affected by us. And okay, the broader question could be, well, how are we affected by people we don't even know or they don't even know us? Well, no one is not connected. If you live in a certain town, if you pay certain taxes, if you're a citizen, if you're a traveler, if depending on your gender, your occupation, we all have ripple effects with one another. And we have preconceived notions about one another, no matter how neutral we may think we are. So Scorpio invites a lot of processing. When the moon is in Scorpio, basically she's saying, okay, let's go deep, or let's relive the old wounds, the old hurts, the intense feelings. I mean, people who have very strong Scorpio pictures in their horoscope or Pluto pictures often have very, very deep memories or deep parts of them that get awakened with the movement of as the moon moves through Scorpio. It's very helpful to know where that sign falls in your horoscope so you can see, oh, is this a particularly intense time for me. But even if it's not, there is part of that in all of our celestial DNA, if you will. So it may be that by transit, you're just really feeling that energetically at this point in time, especially, for instance, if you have other fixed signs in your horoscope, Taurus, Aquarius, or Leo, because all these fixed signs are getting messaging from the fact that Pluto is now in the sign of Aquarius. Uranus is on its way out of the sign of Taurus, but you see this sort of beginning and back or the end of theme for this fixed sign energy. And it dovetails with what I said earlier about fixed Earth being the most tenacious sign energy. Fixed energy is about, I want to stick to, I want to stay with tenacity. And there's a lot of pluses to that. But then there's also a lot of inability to move when it's time to move. So noting the intensity of July 7th, one thing that happens as the morning gets later, Venus, a much faster moving planet than Uranus or Pluto, moves into the sign of Gemini. So it's a quick trip when Venus and Uranus are in total alignment. And then she shifts to Gemini. So morning may be particularly changeable for some of us. We may be presented with things that kind of throw us and or force us to get into a discussion or a realization or even upset with especially a relationship, because it's one of the things Venus symbolizes. As the moon continues to move through Scorpio, once we get past late morning, things theoretically may, I don't know if I'd use the word lighten up because the moon is in the sign of Scorpio. So it's as though, let me put it this way. In the morning, we may confront the biggest upsets, challenges, or even perhaps power struggles. And then as we get into the afternoon, there may feel more like, oh, all right, but let's look in this direction or that direction. So we get more of a sense of possibility from whatever it is that maybe had us really like in a very specific place in the morning. And the possibilities are all about transformation, because this is, in the end, this is what Scorpio can be brilliant at. Many lifetimes in one. So if we have the willingness to move in some new directions with this, we can feel a sense of, okay, so maybe that's how I rise a little higher here, or look in a wider direction, because that gives more of the ability to move, glean, and learn from whatever the deep revelation or upset might have been presented. The main thing about today that I would say in general is, if you're a person who is someplace where people are doing the fireworks, etc., or there's a lot of people, just be alert Pay attention to what's around you. There's a lot of energy that is big, forceful, confrontive. That doesn't mean people are necessarily looking to get into fights or arguments, but it does mean that when people aren't listening well or paying attention well, stuff happens. The other thing that occurs today is the Neptune goes retrograde. Considering everything else I'm looking at, I don't really consider that the biggest thing to mention. On Saturday the 5th, really ideal time to reflect, consider what you might want to get deeper into, any insight that might have come in, especially the day before. Really delve into it, figure it out. It's a great period for solving problems, gaining inspiration. And this holds true on the 6th as well, Sunday. And as I said, the moon goes void, of course, at 6:04 p.m. That may be the whole real light bulb moment for some of us, late afternoon, early evening. Also, whatever needed to be revealed, heard, said, expressed. Always when the moon is in the sign of Scorpio, or I see these kind of intense feeling themes come in, I always say it is important to recognize how you're reacting, take a breath before you respond. Sometimes, however, the reaction has to happen instantaneously. And that also tends to be more with what I would say is an amygdala response, like this is just, I'm doing this now. And the other piece, when I said, think about how you're reacting, how you respond, that tends to be more with a verbal response or how you're following through in communication, more in like reflexes and how we move through life. Then the moon is entering Sagittarius at 6:06 p.m. Sunday evening. And this just looks like an active evening, maybe a time when you want to burn off a lot of energy, especially if you were someone who felt like, oof, this was a lot this particular weekend. As always, do things that are in line with what your body is used to doing or can do. But overall, it looks like a nice evening to kind of expand into new thoughts, maybe see a film that is about travel or other worlds, and open up to possibility. You have been listening to Astrology Insight Now. Please share with your friends, and if you'd like to make a donation, you can do so at astrologyinsightnow.com. Have a stellar week, and we hope to see you next time.